As if the McCrispy couldn't get any better, Bacon and Ranch just entered the chat. The Bacon Ranch McCrispy, available at participating McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
5, 4, 3, 2. It almost feels like this week has just flown by with all the busy action of free agency, but it's Friday. We're here, and we are not finished just yet. We still got a lot to get through on this free agent edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast as we talk more offensive line, the outlook for the rest of free agency, and where things stand for the Bengals and much more. Welcome in to another edition. Muhammad Ahmad here with you, joined by Andrew Gillis and Mike Neislick. And before we get into talking about Orlando Brown and his introduction as a Cincinnati Bengal, we got to start with the other side of the offensive line, and that's Jonah Williams, of course. Per NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, he has requested a trade from Cincinnati in light of the recent news with Brown signing and after reports surfaced that the Bengals planned on moving Jonah Williams to right tackle. So clearly he was not comfortable with that, and Brian Callahan gave that away at the Combine when he said that Jonah is a tried and true left tackle. And if you go all the way back to Jonah's pre-draft process 4 years ago, he said, I'm a left tackle. So he clearly has a stance on that, understandably so. But again, we talked with Frank Pollock, the Bengals offensive line head coach. He didn't really talk much about it, but he did say if he were to make the transition to right tackle, that there should be no issues at all. But again, that's until things get cleared up because he's clearly not happy with the situation. But let me ask you this, guys. If you're the Bengals, you look at Jonah Williams, he's got his fifth year coming up, $12.6 million on the table for him. Do you entertain the possibility of a trade, and why or why not?
Well, I mean, it kind of sounds like you have to if Jonah Williams is going to try and kind of force his way out of town. I mean, who knows kind of where this ends? I think it's obviously a pretty delicate situation when a guy requests a trade because frankly, when a guy requests a trade, there becomes a lot of different dynamics at play in terms of trade negotiations. What kind of leverage does the trading team have? I mean, this has kind of come after free agency is, almost a week old where, okay, some of these teams that might have needed a tackle a few days ago, might have solved that issue or, might have gone elsewhere with their money. And now, you're talking about a guy who's going to be making $12.6 million against the cap in 2023. So, it's not exactly a ton of money, but, that is, a decent chunk of change. And, if the Bengals move on from him, you're kind of going to be right back to where we were a week ago. You're probably going to feel better about that left tackle position, but, you're still going to have a lot of questions at right tackle. So the Bengals have some obviously, they have a desire to keep him, or they would, and it kind of sounded like that today, talking to Frank Pollock. They want to have him around for, more than just, you need a right tackle. You want to have him around because he knows your offense, he knows the scheme, knows the system. And it's just a really delicate situation right now with kind of what's going to happen. And you're going to have to see really what Jonah Williams wants. If you can kind of convince him into staying for another year, I think that would be kind of in the Bengals' best interest. But frankly, I don't know if it's in Jonah Williams' best interest to do that.
Well, what's his leverage? He's going to sit out and not get paid $12.6 million?
Well, no, sorry. So when I said that with trade negotiations, I'm sorry, I meant with other teams. Once a player publicly requests a trade, the Bengals can't go to somebody else and say, hey, we want X, and because the immediate response is, all right, well, you can keep him if he's going to hold out, or if he's going to argue for more money or something like that. The trade negotiation does kind of lose some of its luster if a player has publicly asked out.
Yeah, but I don't think Jonah Williams has any leverage here. In terms
No, I meant do the Bengals have leverage?
Yeah, but I'm saying Jonah Williams doesn't have leverage. So ultimately, they could just say play. Like, I mean, they're not going to just take a bad deal because he's disgruntled. I think they'll have to let emotions settle. Obviously, I thought it was interesting when Frank Pollock said they've reached out, but wouldn't say they've actually talked with or made contact with. The initial report said the trade request was made through his agent. It doesn't sound like they've even talked, which I think is interesting. I would have loved to have had Zach Taylor speak and ask if they had given Jonah Williams a heads up, because that month, when you look at it, they should probably, do that in that situation, especially when a guy is not going to be thrilled by a move, but we don't know what they did or didn't do. But I think you keep him, and I can't see a scenario where he doesn't play in 2023 when he can get $12.6 million.
I mean, like Mike said, he really has no leverage. Like, what's he going to do? Just sit out and say, okay, we're not going to pay you. Now what? But at the same time, though, history is not really on Jonah Williams' side because, I mean, the last time you had anything similar to this was you have to go back pretty far. I mean, 2010, Carson Palmer, when he was the franchise QB, he was disgruntled. He was sick of everything going on. Bengals had just gone 4-12, and he just wasn't happy at that point after 7 years. He says, I want to be traded. And Mike Brown says, tough luck. I mean, he basically didn't budge, so he threatened retirement, but they called his bluff and said, yeah, you're bluffing. Eventually, they did trade him after he was serious, and he did sit out. He went to Oakland, had an interesting finish with Arizona. But, I mean, beyond that, the Bengals have never really taken the bait on that. They usually kind of call guys as bluffs and either, okay, someone like Carson Palmer eventually gets traded because they don't want to deal with this problem on their hands, or they do nothing at all. Now, at the same time, if there is some hope for Jonah Williams, I mean, you can go back a year and a half ago when they traded Billy Price, who was a former first-round pick, to the Giants for B.J. Hill, which I think is a trade that worked out really well for the Bengals. But I guess that's what I want to kind of ask is, let's say the Bengals say, all right, Jonah, we understand how you feel. Let's say maybe they actually do say, all right, we'll make something happen. If you were to trade him, what would you kind of envision a trade looking like? Would it be like a player for player, like the B.J. Hill, Billy Price trade? Would you want to throw in draft picks? What would you want to see a trade look like if the Bengals actually take that seriously?
Well, I mean, I would imagine it'd be for draft capital. I don't know what they would get, to be honest. I mean, to take on a $12.6 million cap hit, you're probably talking about a late pick. I don't know. And a guy that you're only going to get that, if you don't sign him to an extension for 1 year, I don't know what that's, worth. I mean, it's something, but it's not like it's going to get you a top tier pick here in this draft.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, maybe best case scenario, you're thinking a third for Jonah Williams, just because, again, if a team does kind of view him as a substantial answer at left tackle, that's a good thing for the Bengals, because, if a team can look at the situation with Jonah and say, hey, we can get a left tackle, somebody that we think, maybe we can get a long-term deal with done. $12.6 million for a left tackle that you think can be good is not, egregious at all. It's probably pretty good. And, I think that matters for a winning team. I don't know if you would want to trade him to a team that is rebuilding or a team that, probably isn't going to be that good this year, just because I don't know how much interest there's going to be in a guy whose cap hit is going to go up to, maybe free agency levels or wants to test free agency a year from now. So, yeah, I don't think you're getting a whole heck of a lot. Even if, even though he is a left tackle in a premier position, you kind of think back to some of the other trades that have happened, with, the big players, big marquee players that are coming up on contracts. Your AJ Brown gets traded for a first, and I'm not sure if that's 100% applicable here, but again, I think it just goes to show that when the contract is coming and when the payment is come due, teams really kind of shy away from giving a ton of draft capital for that.
And I think the other thing teams have to consider is you're bringing in a guy who's basically worth $12.6 million. Do other teams want to pay the bill for a guy who essentially, at the very least, is like a one-time rental because he's got a year left on that 5th-year option, that the Bengals extended. And so, like, do teams want to pick that up? I don't know, especially because, like, here's the thing: if they were to, take a chance on Jonah Williams, if teams were to go for a trade and say, okay, we'll bring him in, well, you have to bring him in knowing that you're going to probably extend them because what's the point of bringing someone in for just 1 year and you're paying that much money? Like, that's a lot of money, let alone for a left tackle. But I mean, you look at some of the cap space numbers. Like, I'm just looking at over the cap numbers for other teams, like the Bears, 44.8 mil, Falcons, 34.8 mil, Packers, 24 mil. I'm listing those teams out because those are teams that probably could use another left tackle. Like, you got Jake Matthews with the Falcons. He's entering his 10th year. He's not getting younger. David Bakhtiari in Green Bay. He's going to turn 32 this year. He's already well over a decade in his career. So, like maybe those are some teams, and maybe some teams that have less of a cap room might want to consider that. Like, I don't know, the Patriots, Steelers, who knows? It just depends on what they're looking for. And again, if they're willing to bring him in, knowing that they're probably going to want to have to extend him at some point next year when his contract is up. Because like I said, if you're going to bring in a guy like that, I don't know if it's worth bringing it in for just that 1 year and paying that much money. But like, that's on other teams. That's for the Bengals. Like, if they get draft capital, like you guys said, which I think would be the case, I mean, use it to get a defensive tackle, use it to get like some other areas that are like not the most pressing areas of need, like tight end and safety, that I think we're going to see a little bit more action with in free agency in the draft, which we'll talk about. But maybe those like lesser areas of need gives you more room to work with that. So again, I think it's a win-win for the Bengals, just about how they want to play their deck of cards. But
I disagree.
Win.
Yeah, please describe how it's a win-win.
Because you guys said it. There's no leverage for Jonah Williams. There's no leverage for Jonah Williams. So worst case, he sits out. They don't pay him. Okay, no problem.
But then you still need a right tackle.
I don't think it's a win.
That's why you have the draft.
And that doesn't make it a win-win.
They can get a project in the draft and then just hope La'el Collins is healthy, because at least you have him, and then you don't have to worry about cutting him at that point. And you just got Cody Ford, so you have depth at that position as well.
This is not a situation that I don't think anybody would describe as win-win.
I'm not saying they're happy with it. I'm not saying the Bengals are happy with it, but the ball is in their court. Like, they're not the ones who are going to be hurt by this situation. That's what I mean.
No, well, that's the thing. I super disagree. I think they could absolutely be hurt by this situation because, you mentioned, if you trade Jonah Williams for a draft pick or something like that, you can use that to get a defensive tackle. Well, I mean, if you do that, like, we are pretty much back to kind of where this essentially kind of where this conversation was a few days ago, where it was, okay, you feel better about left tackle, but you still need a long-term answer at right tackle, or at least an answer for 2023, which is more pressing because is La'el Collins healthy? Do you feel comfortable trotting Cody Ford out there? Like, there's a lot of different things that go into that, and I think that, yes, you do feel better than you would have a few days ago, but if you get a pick for him, let's say you get a third-round pick for some team, that means you're going to have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. I think one of those picks kind of has to be a tackle, because you don't want the right tackle competition going into camp to be maybe La'el Collins, Cody Ford, like that. I think you would want kind of a younger option there, especially if it's like a DeJuan Jones or an Anton Harrison or somebody like that you can,
or a Darnell Wright.
Ready, you feel better about that long term.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I get it. You're not going to feel as good, but it's like, okay, they'll just say, okay, we got pick number 28 in the draft. We'll get whatever option is out there at tackle. Even if it's a project, I understand it's not ideal, but again, you can work with that and then just hope that if it's La'el Collins or whoever's healthy for week 1, then you can just hope that you got depth behind that person. But at the same time, I mean, like, this is a silly question, but I think about this because obviously we saw it with Jesse Bates. I mean, he didn't sit out last year, but he sat out most of training camp. He sat out most of the preseason. Eventually, he came back and signed the franchise tag. I mean, do you guys see, like, Jonah Williams taking this pretty far and saying, nope, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to hold out? Or do you think he'll cave in and say, okay, I'll be a right tackle. I'll suck it up? Like, what do you think is going to happen if you had to guess?
I mean, I think it's hard to say. Just kind of, especially because the trade request came down. I mean, at least it got reported today. I mean, who knows if he called the Bengals an hour after it and said, I want to get traded. So it's still really early in this. It's hard to say. Look, maybe the Bengals kind of go through the draft process, because you could absolutely see a scenario where, a team wants to pick a tackle in the draft, doesn't, and then all of a sudden they're not feeling great about it headed into June. And okay, well, now a Jonah Williams trade makes sense. Or, do the Bengals kind of sit there and say, well, look, Jonah, you're going to play for a team that's, really good. That's this, that's that. You're going to add some versatility. You're going to be able to do this. And you just get the right person in his ear to say, look, just play it out. And then you can test free agency a year from now. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways that this could go. Kind of like you said, it could, become one of those Jesse Bates things where you get a holdout in camp or something like that. Or it could just be, Jonah, he's not happy by it, but he shows up and he does his job, or he relents in a week. There's a lot of different ways that this could go. And I think it's kind of too early to say.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think we'll just have to keep our eyes on that for the next couple weeks and months, especially once we get to OTAs and training camp. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the other areas of need for the Bengals in free agency. Plus, we'll talk more about Orlando Brown, his introduction to Cincinnati, and what that means for him and the team. Much, much more to come right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we talked about the whole situation with Jonah Williams. On the flip side of that, Orlando Brown is officially a Bengal. He made his media debut, if you want to call it that. He spoke with us today, Friday, as we're taping this podcast at Paycor Stadium. And I think there's one thing that stood out to me from his press conference that I really liked, among a lot of great things, obviously. I think he was really interesting to talk to. But he said that he considers himself old school compared to his peers in the NFL. He considers himself an old school tackle. And I think obviously that kind of goes back to what he learned from his late father, Orlando Brown Sr., who we've talked about on this podcast, who he talked about being a major influence in his life. When you hear a guy like that say, I'm an old school tackle, and he's saying this obviously after he didn't have the best combine and pro day, when he was at Oklahoma 5 years ago. What do you like about that, and why do you think the Bengals should like that, if you got Orlando Brown saying that?
Well, I think he meant, the way I took it is that he's old school in the fact that he's not the most athletic person, and the league has moved to trying to find, not just the big behemoth guys, but guys that are very quick, fast, guys that guys that run a good 40, even if they are 6'7", 6'8". And he's sort of more of a guy that would have fit in the league a long time ago that wasn't quite as athletic, but, you just can't get past him because he's just, just a giant and strong. And so that's the way I took to mean it. Mentality-wise, you could say, the same thing where he seems to be a student of the game because of his lineage. But, that's what I thought he meant in terms of being old school. And I think he said, he can whatever. To me, I thought it was meant, I can make up for my shortcomings. That doesn't have to be a knock, is how people viewed him coming up. They thought that he would suffer because of that, but he's thrived despite of that, and so that's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way. It was a mentality thing. You heard him talking today. Just some of the names that he was mentioning, just of guys that he studied. Is obvious his dad played for the Ravens. He watched Jonathan Ogden, studied Andrew Whitworth, Tony Baselli, Anthony Munoz. He's kind of grown up in that NFL game. He watched those older guys, and it's a mentality thing for him. It's a physicality thing for him. If you kind of look at his career, I believe it's only one game that he's missed in his career. I think he's played in every other regular season game that his team has played in. So, it's just kind of, to put a cliche on it, the lunch pail, go to work, do your job type of mentality that a lot of offensive linemen have. I think that's what he was trying to get across.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm glad you mentioned the names like Tony Baselli and Andrew Whitworth and, Jonathan Ogden, who played with his dad at one point. I thought that was kind of cool because, a lot of other tackles his age would have seen those same guys, but, he was right there. I'm sure he approached those guys, met some of them, with his dad being in the league, but to have kind of that direct connection, and he kind of joked he's spoiled with how he came up and, the teams he's played with because, he's backed up 2 MVP quarterbacks, could be a third for all we know. Who knows what will happen in Cincinnati, which kind of asked him about that, which was interesting. But I think it's a great move for the Bengals. He talked about them as even when they were 4-11, 2 years ago, and he was going against Carl Luss and Sam Hubbard, and then recently Trey Hendrickson, who he thought was one of the best guys he's at the block, on the Bengals defensive line. He always knew the Bengals were a team that was on the cusp. He knew that they were just one play, one drive, whatever it was from, winning a Super Bowl, getting back to it like he saw at Arrowhead. So he knew in the back of his head, this is a championship team. He didn't underrate them. And I don't think he was just saying that because, he was in front of all the cameras. I think he knew, Joe Burrow's the real deal. The Bengals are the real deal. And it just works out for everybody. So I think, good for him and good for the Bengals. But looking at the other areas in free agency, of course, safety is the other big area of concern. Tight end as well. Funny enough, speaking of tight end, an hour before we got on this podcast, as we taped it, Field Yates from ESPN reported that a source told him that Foster Moreau, Joe Burrow's former LSU teammate who's a free agent after playing with the Raiders for the last 4 years, visited the Bengals on this Friday. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is going to be the next big move we see from Duke Tobin? Do you think it should be the next big move from Dick? I just said Dick, forgive me, Duke Tobin. And why is that? You think this might actually be the next thing we see for the Bengals?
I don't know if I would consider it, a big move for sure. Foster Moreau, he's not he's a nice athlete. I don't think he's kind of the athlete that you could get in the draft with, you think of a Darnell Washington type.
Right.
He hasn't really ever kind of done a ton in the NFL. I think that to me he would kind of be a second tight end for you. Because I still think it's pretty clear they're going to add one in the draft. Just, I think you kind of look at running back and tight end as two positions where, they've kind of honed in on and been okay with, kind of investing in the draft and that. So I think that you kind of look at his stat. He hasn't carried an offense as number one tight end. And I'm not sure you really want to do that. We've had conversations on this podcast about, hey, look, this team is really close. So I'm not sure if you want to kind of test that and say, okay, this guy, he's going to, now he's going to be a number one tight end. That to me just kind of feels like a depth move if they were to make it.
I disagree. I think that'd be a pretty good move. I think he could get more out of him than he's shown. And I think he had a pretty good season last year, 33 catches, 420 yards, averaged 12.7 yards per catch, a couple touchdowns. That's in line with what he had the year previous. It's solid talent, consistent, and he's a guy who played with Joe Burrow who can, I think, he has shown that he can get more out of guys, and especially guys that he has good chemistry with. They have playing history together. I think you'd look at him as your number one tight end until You develop a tight end. I think he'd be your number one, and then you have a backup tight end. As it through the draft. I think it'd be reversed, and I think it'd be a pretty good move. It may depend on the salary, but I mean, if you can get him for a decent cap number, I'm guessing somewhere around $6 million. That seems to me like a solid building block for this offense.
I'm with you, Mike. I hear what you're saying, Andrew. I know he doesn't pop out like a Hayden Hurst, who was obviously a former first-round pick, who proved himself his last year in Atlanta before he had another prove-it deal in Cincinnati. But I'm with Mike. And this is where I was talking about the whole Joe Burrow effect of guys like CJ Uzama, Hayden Hurst show off their production and they go get paid in Carolina and New York and places like that. I think if you really want, you don't even have to bring him in long term. I mean, even though he's 25, he's one of the youngest guys on the market. Bring him in for 1-2 years even and just watch. I mean, I get it. He hasn't really shown big numbers in the league, but the exception I'll make to that is that he had big numbers in college when, Joe Burrow was throwing to him his senior year, Joe Burrow's first year at LSU, which was Moreau's last. And I also wonder too, it sucks for Moreau. He graduated.
I don't know about big numbers.
Big compared to his NFL numbers. But what I was saying is, I wonder
22 catches. I don't know, but continue.
Well, what I was saying is, I wonder what if he played in that 2019 LSU offense? Because I was saying it sucks for him that he was just born a little too early to where he graduated before that season. So, I just wonder, they had Thad Moss, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrace Marshall, who's on the Panthers. I just wonder where he would have fit into that. But maybe that what if could be answered by putting him with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. But the other free agent thing we talked about the other day, which is somewhat official, according to Jeremy Fowler, is the Bengals and Nick Scott are quote-unquote working towards a deal. For those who don't know, he played safety for the Rams the last 4 years, played 16 games last year, 77 grade in run coverage per PFF. If this deal does go through and he joins Dax Hill and Tyson Anderson, I know you're not feeling like Von Bell, Jesse Bates okay, but how okay would you feel with a signing like that if it goes through?
On the scale of 1 to 10 okays?
Sure. Make your own scale as you wish.
No, you just said how okay. I mean, it's a fine signing. I mean, you need veteran depth. I mean, it's nothing splashy. We thought they were looking for a bargain and somebody that wouldn't cost them all that much. And I think the names that you've kind of seen have sort of fit that bill.
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a significant downgrade. I think you kind of knew one was coming. I think you can kind of make up for that in other positions, and you obviously need Dax Hill to play really well. But I think if you add Scott, everybody's kind of talked about his ability as a run defender. I think that's kind of what you would need with considering Dax and his athleticism. You want to kind of have somebody that's going to play in the box. That's a role that Vaughn played and played well. So, I think fine is probably how you feel about your safeties. I still think that's a position you're going to need to invest in just because you have Tyson Anderson. You would have your two starters. If Scott and Hill are your two starters, you have Tyson Anderson and Mike Thomas. You probably want another guy there to kind of, serve as depth and play special teams too.
Is fine above or below okay?
That's a good question.
That's it. Yeah. I would say fine is above okay.
For that one. You think so? Actually, I agree.
Sure.
Okay just seems like meh. Fine is like sure. Like there seems more assurance in the word fine than okay.
Yeah,
okay is just
I view it the opposite. I view okay as affirmative and fine as a negative.
I think
fine,
it depends on the
it.
tone, though. I think
Fine,
that can be subjective.
Fine, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. Okay, fine. It's like,
well, see, but you just added inflection into that last okay.
Exactly.
Okay, you're saying okay like you're doing a thing with a bull.
How do you say fine with the lit? Like you can't do that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Say it like that. No, that's
like if you were to say hey Andrew, I will be not at the facility today, and it's not a big deal. I would say, yeah, that's fine.
See, that sounds negative to me. But if
that doesn't. Okay, so what? So you would prefer me to say, yeah, that's okay.
Correct.
See, in that case, I would say okay sounds worse.
No, see, I think fine sounds worse.
We just had like a whole grammar vocabulary debate, man. That was interesting. But to be continued on that. I want to wrap up with one last thing that maybe I'll make you guys look good or I'll make you look bad depending on the answers I get. But if you guys remember, Orlando Brown was talking today, and I think it was James Rapine from Sports Illustrated who asked him, what do you remember about your 2018 combine meeting with the Bengals? Of course, that was before Zach Taylor. That was Marvin Lewis's last combine as the Bengals head coach. And he said that Marvin Lewis asked him, what is the capital of Spain? And he answered, Portugal. Well, the answer is obviously Madrid, and Portugal is a country next to Spain. So he was, I guess, somewhat close. But to see where your all's geography skills stand, I have 6 random countries from different.
Close?
Huh?
Like in proximity?
Proximity. Obviously, the answer was far from close. I'm saying distance-wise, he was like kind of there. But to test your all's geographical knowledge, I have 6 countries, completely random, ones you probably wouldn't think of, and they're from different continents and corners of the world. I'm going to ask you if you know the capitals of these respective countries. You guys want to give it a shot? We've got 6 countries, and I picked them completely randomly.
Sure.
All right.
How did
First
you pick
one.
them randomly?
I honestly just looked at a list of countries and blindly just picked random names. And I picked the ones that aren't like, I guess this is subjective, but your more
So
known countries.
So it's not random.
It's somewhat random. Anyhow, okay, let's just get to the game here. Okay, the first country. You guys ready? Okay, the first country is Poland. What is the capital of Poland?
Warsaw.
Okay, there you go. Good job. All right.
So is this just like one of those games where you what here? I guess we just buzz in basically and
yes,
pick the okay.
Yes.
No cheating. Out if you got it.
I'm gonna ask it really quick because I don't want to see any cheating. So
That's
okay,
fine.
Good job, Andrew. You got that one. Indonesia.
I got nothing.
I have no idea.
Jakarta.
Okay.
All right. Next one. Peru.
Lima.
There you go. Okay. Wow.
I know Ohioans say Lima, so there you go.
I was gonna see if you're gonna pick up on that. That was good.
I almost said Lima too. It's Lima.
All right. Here we go. New Zealand.
Oh, Hut? No, that's not right.
Wait, is that a city? I never heard of that.
Yeah. Damn.
It's not.
I don't know.
It's Wellington.
Wellington. Okay.
All right. Lebanon.
Oh God. I don't know Lebanon. Mike, do you know Lebanon?
No, I'm not buzzing in.
All right. The answer to that is Beirut. My home country is actually south of Lebanon, so that's how I know that. Last but not least.
That doesn't sound like a random pick then. Did you pick
Yeah.
that? Exactly
Well, I just happened to know the answer, but it was still random. Yeah.
This was a rigged game, and I think it's.
Wow. So I pick one country, and it just so happens to be not far from where my family's from. Wow. Okay. I guess it doesn't count.
Sus, as the kids say.
Sure. As your kids would say. Last but not least, Senegal.
Yeah, you got me.
Dakar.
Okay. The only thing I know about Senegal is that Ohio had when I was covering the team, they had a kid from Senegal. That's it. So, sorry to the people of Dakar.
Shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. Well, hey, you had 2 or 3 answers there. You were doing good for a bit. So, give yourself a pat on the back, Andrew. Mike, you need to brush up on those geography skills. But I think all of us could.
I refuse to participate in a game that was designed poorly to make us look bad.
I ask you 6 countries and the capital of those countries. I don't even know if it's a game. That's just trivia at that point.
You said they were picked randomly, but they were not picked randomly.
Well, because one of them just happened to be close to where my family's from. Big deal.
You looked at a list and picked them out. That is not random. Random is like you spin a globe and you put your finger down. That's random because you're randomly picking something.
I randomly picked by just looking at the list.
No,
I was like, okay, this is in Europe. This is in South America. This is in Southeast Asia.
This is not random.
I disagree. I think your interpretation of random is different from my interpretation of random. But I think we're just going to have to randomly say...
Interpretation is the definition. You can't have a method to picking countries. That's not how random works.
So how would you, like, okay, if you were to do this game, if you want to even call it a game, and pick the 6 countries like I did, like, how would you randomly pick it, like, differently from I randomly picked it?
Spin a globe, and then you place your finger and stop it.
What if I don't have a globe? I don't physically possess one.
Then you've got to find a different a way.
And that's the way that I picked.
Or here's an idea. Don't say it's a random game. Say I pick these specifically out of a list.
Deal. The next time I test you guys on your trivia, just watch. In like 2-3 weeks, I'm going to randomly pick 6 more countries. I can't say randomly. I'm going to pick 6 more countries on a random day. And I'm going to test you guys and see if you're going to brush up on those skills. But anyhow, that's going to wrap it up for the week. Stay tuned as next week we start grading the Bengals and their free agency efforts, get back into our mock drafts, look ahead to the month of April, and get into the spring if this weather can start warming up in the Cincinnati tri-state area. But once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Enjoy a weekend of March Madness, and I'm sorry if your bracket is broken.